Sarah Winters had been tracking the mule deer through the Montana wilderness for 3 hours when the sky turned purple. She froze mid-step, her compound bow held steady, and watched as massive ships materialized above the forest canopy. They hung there like dark clouds, blocking out the afternoon sun. Behind her, a low growl rumbled from her backpack. She reached back and unzipped the modified carrier, letting Brutus poke his broad, striped head out. The honey badger's black eyes fixed on the ships above, and his growl deepened. "Easy, boy," Sarah whispered. "I see them too." The ships descended slowly, deliberately. Sarah had seen enough science fiction movies to know what was happening. This was first contact, and judging by the aggressive posture of those vessels, it wasn't going to be friendly. She turned and ran. Her boots pounding against the forest floor, Brutus clinging to her shoulders like he always did during their hunts. By the time she reached her cabin, the news was already flooding her satellite phone. New York was burning. Tokyo had gone silent. Los Angeles was under siege. The aliens, which the emergency broadcasts were calling the Kryleth, had arrived without warning and begun systematic destruction of Earth's major cities. Sarah looked around her remote cabin. Solar panels on the roof, water from the nearby stream, a root cellar full of preserved food. She had built this place to be off-grid, away from the chaos of modern life. Now it might be the thing that saved her. Brutus chittered and climbed down from her shoulders, waddling over to his food bowl. Sarah smiled grimly. The honey badger had been a rescue, seized from an illegal exotic pet operation 3 years ago. She had been volunteering at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center when they brought him in, half-starved and vicious. Everyone else had been terrified of him. Sarah had simply looked into those fearless eyes and seen a kindred spirit. Now, as the world ended outside, she watched her unlikely companion eat kibble like nothing was wrong. Honey badgers didn't care about alien invasions. They didn't care about anything. The first Kryleth patrol found her cabin on the 3rd day. Sarah was checking her perimeter traps when she heard the whine of their anti-gravity engines. 3 small scout ships, each about the size of a car, drifted between the trees. They moved with an eerie grace, scanning the forest with pulsing blue lights. She dropped flat behind a fallen log, her bow already in hand. Through a gap in the wood, she watched as the ships paused near her cabin. A hatch opened on the nearest one, and something stepped out. The Kryleth soldier was tall and insectoid, with 4 arms and a chitinous exoskeleton that gleamed like oil. It carried a weapon that crackled with purple energy. 2 more soldiers emerged from the other ships, and they began moving toward her home. Sarah's heart hammered. Inside that cabin was Brutus. Inside were all her supplies, her life, her sanctuary. She stood up and drew her bow. The first arrow took the lead Kryleth through what she hoped was its head. The alien dropped instantly, purple fluid spraying from the wound. The other 2 spun toward her, raising their weapons, but Sarah was already moving. She rolled behind a tree as energy bolts scorched the bark where she'd been standing. 1 arrow left, 2 targets. Sarah's mind raced through the geometry of the shot, the timing, the impossible accuracy it would require. Then she heard it, an enraged shriek from inside the cabin. Brutus burst through the window in an explosion of glass and fury. The honey badger hit the ground running and launched himself at the nearest Kryleth. The alien tried to aim its weapon, but Brutus was already climbing up its leg, his powerful jaws clamping down on anything he could reach. The Kryleth screamed, a horrible chittering sound, and stumbled backward. Sarah used the distraction. She stepped out from behind the tree and loosed her arrow. It flew true, punching through the 3rd Kryleth's weapon and into its thorax. The alien convulsed and fell. The 2nd Kryleth, still wrestling with Brutus, managed to grab the honey badger and fling him away. Brutus hit a tree with a sickening thud and dropped to the ground. The alien turned its weapon toward Sarah. She had no arrows left, no time to run. Sarah grabbed her hunting knife and charged. The Krylith fired, but Sarah was already diving low. The energy bolt seared the air above her head. She came up inside the alien's reach and drove her knife into the joint between its chest plates. The blade sank deep, and the Krylith made a gurgling sound before collapsing. Sarah ran to Brutus. The honey badger was already standing, shaking himself off like he'd merely tripped. He looked up at her, chittered once, and then waddled over to investigate the dead aliens. Over the next few weeks, Sarah learned that she wasn't alone. Other people in remote areas had survived the initial invasion. The Krylith had focused on cities, seeing them as the centers of human power. They had overlooked the hunters, the preppers, the farmers, and the hermits scattered across the wilderness. These humans began fighting back with whatever they had: hunting rifles, crossbows, traps meant for bears that worked just as well on overconfident aliens. The Krylith had expected advanced weaponry and organized military resistance. They had planned for tanks and jets and missiles. They hadn't planned for a Montana woman with a bow and a honey badger who refused to die. Sarah's cabin became a rallying point. Other survivors found her through the ham radio network she'd set up. They shared information about Krylith patrol patterns, weak points in their armor, and ways to sabotage their equipment. Sarah taught them how to move silently through the forest, how to track prey, how to wait for the perfect shot. Brutus became something of a mascot. The aliens were terrified of him. They had scanned Earth's creatures and cataloged the dangerous ones: bears, wolves, big cats. Honey badgers hadn't registered as a threat. Now the Krylith soldiers whispered about the small demon that fought alongside the human female, the creature that couldn't be killed and never retreated. 6 months into the invasion, the tide began to turn. The Krylith had conquered the cities, but they couldn't hold the wilderness. Every supply convoy they sent got ambushed. Every patrol disappeared. The humans, fighting on their own terms with weapons the aliens had dismissed as primitive, were winning through sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. Sarah stood on a ridge overlooking a Krylith command post. Beside her, 20 other survivors waited with bows, rifles, and homemade explosives. Brutus sat at her feet, calmly grooming his claws. She thought about how the aliens had underestimated Earth. They had seen humanity's cities and assumed that's all we were. They hadn't understood that humans had spent thousands of years as hunters, that we had survived ice ages and predators and each other through sheer determination. They hadn't understood that we bonded with the most unlikely creatures and turned them into family worth dying for. The Krylith had made a fundamental error. They had judged humanity by our technology and missed what really made us dangerous: our refusal to give up, our ability to adapt, and our tendency to befriend anything with teeth and claws. Sarah raised her bow. Around her, the others readied their weapons. Below, the alien command post sat unaware of the storm about to hit it. "For Earth," Sarah whispered. Brutus chittered his agreement. Honey badgers didn't retreat, and neither did humans. The attack began at sunset, and by dawn, the command post was nothing but smoking ruins. The Krylith would send reinforcements, and Sarah's people would be waiting. This was their planet. This was their home. And they would defend it with everything they had, one arrow at a time if necessary. In the end, the aliens would learn what Earth's predators had learned long ago. Never underestimate a human with something to protect, especially when that human has a honey badger watching her back.